Okay, so I want to contrast Augustine's pessimism with a 19th and 20th century thinker's pessimism about the human condition. Both of them very pessimistic thinkers about human beings. And that thinker is Sigmund Freud. Okay, so for Augustine, as mentioned, the human problem is sin. Augustine says we human beings always mess up. Generation after generation, we try to change. Each generation pledges to do better than the generation that preceded it, and yet each generation finds a new way to foul things up. And the reason why is because we are sinners. We have a disease of the soul, and that sinful condition, he thinks that there is a way out. He thinks there is a rescue plan, as it were. But it's not something that we can change ourselves. Okay, that sinful condition is really, really destructive to us. For Sigmund Freud, the human condition is also deeply messed up, but not because of sin. Freud does not necessarily believe in the idea of sin. For Freud, there are three levels to human consciousness. There is the ego, the superego, and the id. Okay, the ego is your conscious self. That's just you right now, sitting in class, experiencing a lecture. It's you going about your daily activities. Maybe you felt the sensations of exercise this morning. Okay, I was able to get a swim in, so I'm happy. Maybe you felt the sensations of driving this morning when you drove to school. That's the ego. The superego is the conscience. That is the voice of your parents or of some influential mentor or coach or teacher in your background telling you what is right and what is wrong. The superego condemns you when you choose badly, and the superego rewards you, at least psychologically, when you choose well. But for Freud, the human condition is deeply problematic because of the id. Freud thinks that the problem is the id. The id is the subconscious. Okay, it's that part of you that wells up at certain times when it's least expected or not wanted. Maybe it sometimes arises in dreams, when you dream surprising, startling things that honestly, quite honestly, aren't desired. You don't want to dream those things, and yet you do because the id, this untamable, subconscious realm of seething passions. Freud calls it a seething cauldron of passions. Sometimes rises up and it overwhelms you. Okay, now for Freud, the secret or the problem in the human condition is the id, which overwhelms the ego and is this untamable aspect of consciousness. And the right answer here is to use therapy. With therapy, what the therapist is supposed to do is the therapist is supposed to dredge the id to the surface, to clean out the sewer, as it were, in the consciousness. Dredge the id to the surface, to bring it up through hypnosis or through a recollection of dreams or a recollection of one's childhood memories. That's often what therapists do. Okay, and the idea is to organize the id, to structure it, to build it in a kind of hem it in a pin, to build around it certain fortifications to make sure that it is kept in its place. The idea is to use therapy to organize the seething cauldron of passions. So Freud thinks that there is a solution. He thinks the problem is not necessarily that we have a disease of the soul called sin, but that there is an aspect of our soul that is untamable, that's deeply, I guess you could say, wild. Okay, and the way to tame it is through therapy. Now, notice that Freud's solution involves human beings saving themselves. Okay, for Freud, we need to organize our souls. We need to structure them. We can save ourselves if we do so. For Augustine, the answer is that we cannot save ourselves. He thinks that sin is such a deep and problematic condition that we cannot save ourselves from it. And if left to its own, on its own, sin would drag us to death. It would lead us to self-destructive activities. it would drive us to destroy others, and it would ultimately bring about our own spiritual and physical death. Okay, so Augustine proposes that the way out is a rescue mission. So let's talk about the rescue mission. Augustine says God does not leave us in our sinful state without any hope or help. God has offered us a way out. And that way out takes the form of the salvific work of Jesus of Nazareth on our behalf. Okay, so God sends himself as an emissary to become a human being in the form of God the Son. And Jesus of Nazareth dies, and in dying takes upon himself the destructive aspects of our sinful condition, the destructive consequences. He takes upon himself the punishment necessary for that. He takes upon himself all of the deeply damaging results of that. And for Augustine, this rescue that takes the form of Jesus of Nazareth's death on behalf of humanity offers us a way of escape from our own problems. Now, there are 3 steps to the Augustinian rescue mission, and I'm describing philosophical concepts that can be found especially in books 3 and 4 here. Okay, 1 step is prevenient grace. One step is justifying grace. And then 1 step is sanctifying grace, the 3rd step. Let me stop, and I guess I haven't stopped for questions at all so far. So let me stop and let's do a little bit of Q&A, and let me get us started by asking you guys what grace means. So what does the word grace mean? When I say the judge showed grace in this particular matter, what is meant by the word grace?
Usually leniency in that scenario.
In that scenario, leniency. Mm-hmm. Good. Good. Grace is just unearned favor. It wasn't merited. The criminal didn't deserve it. He deserved to be punished, but grace was shown to him. Grace is unearned favor or kindness. And we human beings deserve to face the consequences of our sinful condition. But God shows us unearned favor, unearned kindness, and helps extricate us from that sinful condition. What does prevenient mean here? Well, prevenient grace is the first step of the rescue mission. Okay, prevenient grace is grace that fixes our will. Augustine thinks we have free will. Human beings have free will. We can choose freely. We aren't subject to deterministic environmental surroundings. And for Augustine, we can choose freely because God has fixed our will with prevenient grace. Prevenient grace is that grace that God extends to human beings, all human beings, in fact. All human beings get prevenient grace. God has extended prevenient grace to all human beings to fix their will so that they can choose to accept the rescue mission. Okay, it is essential that this first step take place in the Augustinian view of things. If God did not fix our will, if we were, say, just to accept the rescue mission for some reason without God having fixed our will, not that Augustine thinks we could, but if we were, we could perhaps take credit for saving ourselves. Augustine is a controversialist. He writes pamphlets, and one of the groups he writes pamphlets against is the Pelagians. Pelagianism is just the view that human beings can rescue themselves from their own sinful condition by means of good works. Okay, we can achieve salvation through good works is the idea here. Okay, but Augustine doesn't think that human beings can save themselves. And this first step of prevenient grace is crucial to that idea, that the rescue mission has to come from without. It is wholly initiated from without, from outside of us. Prevenient grace is offered by God once more to all human beings, wherever they are, regardless of their situation or circumstances. No one can reject it. You cannot reject prevenient grace. Okay, the second step is justifying grace. And justifying grace is maybe the crucial step in the whole rescue mission. Justifying grace is the grace that makes us right with God. To justify something is to make right that which was wrong, or to make straight that which was crooked or narrow, to make it straight or level, to level that which was uneven. Okay, justifying grace makes us right with God. And the justifying act is the death of Jesus of Nazareth. That's what, if we believe in that, and in that death as a salvific work on our behalf, then we are justified and are given unearned grace to cover our sins and to rescue us from our condition. All persons are given justifying grace. All humans are given justifying grace. Only some accept it. Okay, and so that's a crucial difference between 1 and 2, the first and second steps of the rescue mission. All accept this, regardless of whether they want to or not. Only some accept justifying grace. Sanctifying grace is grace that is extended only to those who have accepted justifying grace. Okay, sanctifying grace is grace that improves us. It sanctifies us. It steadily reforms our character states after our sinful condition. And this is something that is extended freely by God to those who have accepted the rescue mission's first 2 steps and are willing to recognize the justifying work of Jesus of Nazareth on their behalf. Okay, I'm guessing that for virtually all of us here, this conception of human beings is something that we're very familiar with, and this conception of this way of thinking about the human condition is something that we're very familiar with. I grew up in the church, and these are ideas that I was regularly exposed to. I'm also very sympathetic to this worldview. This is basically my worldview. I am a Christian, and I find this a very convincing view for a variety of reasons of human beings and of the human problem and the opportunity for escape from that problem. But let me ask if there are any questions or comments, clarifying questions, reflections, any ideas. There are some criticisms I want to raise against Augustine's views, but I'm going to wait and raise them at a later point. Let me right now mostly ask for clarification or any reflections so far. Mm-hmm.
You're saying that grace that fixes free will to choose to accept the rescue mission, right?
That's right, yes.
So wouldn't that not be free will? Because everybody has to accept it regardless?
Good. Okay, so prevenient grace does not incline us to accept the rescue mission. Prevenient grace does fix our will so that we could accept the rescue mission if we so please. Mm-hmm. Augustine thinks we have free will, but he thinks we only have free will to accept the rescue mission precisely because God has given us free will. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more on St. Augustine and the notion of free will. I think after the break. We'll see if we can get to it by then. But it is a concept that is central to his notion of the rescue mission. Namely, we have to be free to accept it or to reject it. Good. Other questions? This second step here, the justifying grace step, is one that has led to a crucial division in the history of Christianity. Both Protestants and Catholics claim St. Augustine, and both are right. He is a thinker who informed both traditions. But there are different views of the justifying grace step. One is the Catholic view, and the other is the Protestant view. And lots of philosophers and theologians down through the centuries have kind of hated each other's guts over this one. There have been some pretty big disputes over this. Do I have any Catholics in the room? Yes? None? What are your backgrounds? What are your religious affiliation backgrounds? Non-denominational. Okay? Others?
Baptist.
I'm sorry?
Muslim.
Muslim? Okay?
Baptist.
Baptist? Atheist? Non-denominational Christian? Okay, fair enough. Good. We're kind of all over the map here then. Okay? Let me articulate for you guys, since we don't have any Catholics in the room, the Catholic view of justifying grace. The Catholic view is that God imparts justifying grace to us, and this changes us. It alters our character states. Okay, so that we become different in kind, in principle, than we would otherwise be. Okay, the Protestant view is that nothing is actually changed about the human character state by virtue of justifying grace. Rather, what has changed is the way in which God perceives us. God perceives us differently by virtue of the justifying process. Metaphors could be used here. You could think of God putting on glasses when he perceives us now. After you accept the justifying grace, God perceives you differently. He now sees you as justified. You could maybe say, here's another metaphor, clothing, robes of righteousness or something like that, right? Okay, so the Protestant view is that we are not fundamentally changed. The Catholic view is that we are. Okay, and that's led to a lot of disputes down through the years. Okay, let me stop there on this concept. These are crucial Augustinian concepts. And I want to turn now to some other important Augustinian concepts before I introduce some critical remarks. Okay, so in Book 1, we're going to go back from Book 2 to Book 1. In Book 1 of the Confessions, Augustine seeks to enter into a philosophical reflection where he understands what God's nature is. Okay, this is a very influential reflection. It's one that isn't original to Augustine. It's not as though he comes up with new ideas about God's nature, but it's an important and influential reflection because it systematizes ideas that previously had been disorganized. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about God's nature. Let me just put it up here, and then maybe I'll move down there in a second. Let's talk about God's nature on the Christian view of things. Okay, in the Christian view, God has several characteristics, and we can describe these in terms of omni words. Omnipotence. God is omnipotent. Omniscience. Okay, omnipresence. And omnibenevolence. Okay, let me talk a little bit about what these words mean. What does the word omnipotent mean? All powerful. Okay, so in the Christian tradition, God is seen as being all powerful. Okay, does this mean God can do anything? No, it does not. God can't do anything. What can God not do? Well, God can't sin on the Christian view of things. Arguably, God cannot reconcile logical impossibilities. So the unstoppable object meets the immovable rock, right? God can't reconcile logical impossibilities. And this one's controversial. Arguably, God might not be able to change the rules of mathematics. Maybe it's in God's nature. Okay, so God couldn't make 1 + 1 = 3. It is arguably in God's nature that mathematics be a certain way. And you can reference a few other similar kinds of things, logical fundamentals and things like that, that God might not be able to do. Okay, but basically everyone in the Christian tradition agrees that God can do pretty much anything else. Okay, and that's what omnipotence means. Okay, omniscience, what does that mean? All-knowing, all-knowing. Okay, does this mean God knows everything? You guys are careful this time. No, it does not. What does God not know? Well, again, God doesn't know what it's like to sin. So he doesn't know from a first personal perspective what it's like to sin. There might be some other things that God doesn't know. So some theologians and philosophers in the Christian tradition argue that God doesn't know the future. This is not a mainstream view. Okay, it is a minority view. But it could be the case that God is actually located inside time, just like human beings are. And for that reason, God does not know the future. He might know general outlines of it, but not details, or he might not even know the general outlines. Some would say. It's a speculative, these are speculative kinds of topics. Nobody really knows the answers here. We're just kind of, it's fun to think about. Okay, yes?
So would you say God doesn't know the thoughts of human beings since he doesn't know what it's like to sin?
That's a great question. Okay, so, yeah, that's a really good question.
Well, it's not like we all think of sin all the time.
Yeah, but you could argue that every thought that we have is infected with sinful or self-interested kinds of ideals. My 5-year-old has conversations with me, and she's really sweet and really cute, but her mind is really small. Like, it's really small. Like, she hasn't seen much of the world. She actually thinks that her country is Texas. I have encouraged this. She's going to be surprised, I think probably in the next year or two, when she finds out that it's actually America. My wife thinks that I'm doing our children a disservice by telling them that their land is Texas. So, okay. So anyway, but I mean, her world is really small. Now, I have conversations with her, and I can anticipate her thoughts before she has them, because, like, I mean, she doesn't have a mind that's been educated for, I don't know how many years of education I went through. Right? And there are lots of other ways in which I can think faster and kind of around her, and my mind sort of encompasses hers, and I know what she's thinking, right? But I don't know what she's thinking from the inside. Okay? I don't know what it's like to be her mind right now. And honestly, given the choices that she makes in life, I think it must be really chaotic in there. It must be a very confused little mind much of the time. Because, yeah, I mean, like the kinds of choices she makes are they're just logically impossible to defend. It's just kind of absurd. Anyway, moving on. So in a certain sense, I know what she's thinking, but in another sense, not from the inside, I don't know what she's thinking, since I'm not her. I don't know, that's just a metaphor, right? But maybe that's what it is for God to know what's in our minds. Maybe, I don't know. Here's another famous controversy about God's omniscience. The controversy is over whether God knows counterfactuals. Okay, so let me offer you guys an example here. This morning I woke up, I stumbled downstairs to the kitchen, and I faced a crucial choice. Wheaties or Cheerios? It's a really important choice. Because forever after, for the rest of my life, once I choose a particular path, I will be unable to go back and choose the other path. right? If I chose the Wheaties path, maybe Wheaties takes, 10 seconds longer to load into my bowl, and for that reason, I'm 10 seconds slower onto the highway, and for that reason, the car ahead of me misses me when he veers into my lane, and I don't have an accident on my way into school this morning. Okay, who knows? Who knows what contingencies are now different in my life as a result of the choice that I made between Wheaties and Cheerios this morning. By the way, which did I choose? Cheerios, you hope? I chose Wheaties because it was the breakfast of champions. And I needed to have that sort of a day. Cheerios are heart healthy, that is true. But Wheaties that's like a healthy cereal too. My kids recently have been eating, chocolate frosted sugar bombs, some crazy stuff. And I tasted one of them the other day, and he's like, this stuff is nasty. Why do we feed this stuff to our children in America? This is crazy. Because it's America. Okay, so I chose Wheaties, right? And that was the path that I took. Now, this is the path untraveled. Forever after, I will not know what my life could have been had I chosen Cheerios. Does God know what my life would have been had I chosen Cheerios? Well, we don't know. It's just speculation. This is counterfactual knowledge that didn't actually take place. The quantum theorists tell us that in all probability we exist alongside millions, trillions of parallel universes, okay, which are universes where a different choice was made and a new universe emerged as a result. Okay, and God knowing these kinds of things is called middle knowledge. Does God have it, is the question. Does God have middle knowledge? In other words, does God have knowledge of the things that I did not do? No one knows. It's speculative, right? But it's fun to speculate about. And actually, middle knowledge solves some crucial theological and philosophical dilemmas if one is a theistic Christian. Middle knowledge solves some crucial dilemmas. So maybe I can point them out as we go through Augustine and other thinkers. But it is something that may be the case or may not be the case. Okay. Omnipresence. God is present everywhere. Now, in the Christian tradition, this does not mean that all things are God. Okay, so the Christian tradition distinguishes between manifest presence and underlying presence. So God is not the tree or the plant or the rock, but God's underlying presence lends existence to the tree and the plant and the rock. In other words, God's willing them to be enables them to be. Okay, although in the Christian tradition, God is not synonymous with these things. God is not the tree, as it were. Is that a hand, Victoria? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So many Christians, myself included, half the week, believe in the existence of an eternal hell. And God's presence lends existence to that, assuming that there is an eternal hell. There may be, it may just all end for people. I don't know. I've toyed with this recently. I've toyed with the Annihilationist View. And I think maybe I've mentioned that in class. That's the view that that after a certain amount of punishment, appropriate punishment for people's sinful behavior, their souls get annihilated. I don't know. There is biblical support for annihilationism. Yeah. There's also biblical support for eternal damnation. So I'm not sure what the exact answer is there. There's probably more biblical support for eternal damnation. But again, I'm not sure. Okay, omnibenevolence. What does that mean? All good. Does that mean that God is all good? Yes. Yes, it does. Okay, which basically just means it's just the notion that God's nature is to be good and it's not possible for God to do otherwise. We might not understand the ways of God or why things are the way they are. I mean, heck, if I were in charge, people would be able to eat chocolate without consequences. But they are the way they are because God is good. And because in God's goodness, God has decided that this is the way things are going to be. Okay, now, God's goodness, on the Augustinian conception of things, and again, more generally in the Christian tradition, is compatible, Augustine thinks, with the existence of evil. Okay, so we will be touching on that subject today. How does evil exist alongside a good God? Is a classic, crucial question in Christian history. Okay, but for what it's worth, it is the view that is prevalent throughout the Christian tradition. Okay, let me pause and ask if there are comments or questions or reflections on these things. Yes. Mm-hmm.
What would you say about some of the more wrathful acts in biblical stories like plagues and the killing of?
Oh, we can cite much worse things than the Egyptian plagues. The killing of the Canaanites is like a crucial, classic biblical story that's problematic.
And then just a lot of
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. It's a very hard question to answer. So for those of you who are not in the know, there are biblical passages. If you're a Christian, then you believe that the Bible is God's words to human beings. And you may or may not hold to the view that it's all inspired by God. Okay? I personally think it's inspired. I don't think it's inerrant in all that it says, but I think it is inspired. That means that I think that what it says is true. In what sense is it true? That's a good question. Is it true in all its details? I think probably not. Okay, so I think, for instance, that there are certain facts and figures, in the Old Testament especially, that might not be accurate or might not be correct. But I think it is true for sure in the spiritual themes that are present in it. And I think actually that the crucial figure in the Christian scriptures, Jesus of Nazareth, the descriptions of Jesus of Nazareth and his life are all factually true. I think that's the case. I think it has to be in order for Jesus of Nazareth to be what he is said to be in the Christian tradition. But what about the other stuff? Well, I think probably the other stuff is true, like the Old Testament stories about the Canaanites or about the Egyptian plagues. I think they are probably true in general outline. Okay, now I got to be careful here because I don't want people to interpret me wrongly. Much of the very early period biblical passages has the feel and structure of myth. Okay? So for sure, for instance, something like the Noahic flood is something that has the feel or structure of myth. Or Adam and Eve in the garden, right? With this story about the serpent and all that, right? Okay, it has the feel and structure of myth. As you proceed in the Old Testament, it begins to have a feel and a structure that is much more intelligible to us and feels more like a factual narrative. Okay, and I hesitate to use the language of feeling, but I don't really know how else to describe it. I personally think that there was an exodus from Egypt, there were plagues, and there was a conquest of Canaan. I don't know if it had all the details that are described in the text. But if you do believe, as I do, that these are, in general outline, real historical events that are being described, then you've got a theological and philosophical problem. And the problem is that God orders these events to take place in the Old Testament passages. Okay, and for those not in the know, there are explicit passages where God says in Deuteronomy, in Joshua, these Old Testament books that are central to the Hebrew self-identity, he says, go into the land of Canaan and kill all the people you find there. Don't spare anyone, men, women, and children. Slaughter them all. He also always says, because their sins have become so great that it has become impossible for me to abide their presence any longer upon the earth. Okay, some formula like that is what he always says afterwards. My take on that, and this is, again, just my own justification, what I think is probably going on here. My take on that is that there were genocidal things going on in Canaan, like horrific actions that the peoples there were doing. And that God basically commissioned another people group, the Hebrews, to be executioners, to end the people who were doing the horrible things. So crimes against humanity these days, if a nation is committing crimes against humanity within its borders, it is basically all, in international law, it's seen as almost always justifiable for other nations to go to war with those nations that are committing crimes against humanity so as to protect the innocents within their borders. Okay? Like if Hitler's slaughtering all the Jews, it's justifiable to go to war with Hitler to protect the Jews who can't protect themselves from being slaughtered. Okay. The Canaanites are practicing widespread child sacrifice. There are numerous instances of them slaughtering innocents. I think probably they're doing something along the lines of genocide. Crimes against humanity level stuff. And my own take would be what's going on in those passages is God is commissioning another people group to act like a nation state to go to war with these peoples in Canaan and to go to war with them as executioners. I think that's probably what's going on. Now, there are some problems with that justification, to be perfectly honest. One problem with that justification is the Hebrews are supposed to kill everybody. That includes the kids. And this is because the Old Testament relies upon a collective understanding of justice that is very foreign to contemporary Americans and our individualistic sensibilities. Okay, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Old Testament, there is all throughout the Old Testament texts this notion that justice must be served at the family group level and not at the individual level. So if a member of a family does some horrible, heinous thing, the family is what needs to be punished, not necessarily the individual. And that's an understanding of justice that's really hard for contemporary Americans to wrap our minds around. Okay, so like there's there are these scenes in the Old Testament where this one dude, for instance, he steals some idols, okay, from a city that they're conquering, and he's not supposed to. They've been ordered not to steal anything. Okay, he steals some idols, and the Israelites find out about this, and he's not the only one who gets punished. His whole family group gets punished. Okay, and all throughout the Old Testament, you find this family group conception of punishment and of justice. So I think probably the reason why the kids and the women get killed in Canaan is because of a collective understanding of justice. I don't understand collective justice. I'm a 21st century American. I don't get the idea of the whole family group getting punished when only some members of the family group are the ones who committed the crime. I don't understand that. But it is the sense of justice that pervaded in human history, not just among the Hebrews, but among everybody, up until late Roman times, really. So it's something that you can find not just in the Old Testament, but all throughout ancient texts. And it's very hard for us contemporaries to wrap our minds around. Okay, that's a long answer, but that's what I would say in response to questions about how God's omnibenevolence is consistent with certain problematic passages and commands we find in the Christian scriptures. Okay, good. Other questions on that particular topic? That's a can of worms. I shouldn't have been recording that. I've probably ended my career here at HBU. Okay, let's get started again. In books 3 and 4 of the Confessions, we find Augustine grappling with ideas about sin and evil. Okay, and in particular, he's interested in a couple of questions regarding sin and evil in these books. First of all, he wants to know what is evil, right? Or what is sinfulness. Second, he wants to know where it comes from. And third, he's interested in the so-called problem of evil, which is how is evil compatible with the existence of a good God? Okay, the problem of evil, one more time, is how is evil, the existence of evil, compatible with the existence of a good God? Okay, so notice that the Christian notion of evil is very different than previous understandings of wrongdoing. Okay, the notion of evil is a word that carries within it connotations of culpability, like guilt or deserving of punishment or something like that. And although you can find ideas about badness in earlier thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, you don't necessarily find this notion of evil, namely that badness carries with it guilt or culpability that must be remedied. For Augustine, the answer, what is evil, is the answer to the question, what is evil, is a complicated answer. But he holds to the view that God is good. So one thing he does not think is that evil was created by God. So whatever it is, it's not a created thing. Okay, not a created thing. That's his view. So evil, one more time, for Augustine, if God is good, God is not the creator of evil. So whatever evil is, it is not a result of God's creative act. In fact, Augustine concludes that evil is an absence or a lack. Let me put that up here. An absence or a lack. It is just the absence of goodness or the lack of goodness. Again, it doesn't have real existence on its own. If it did, then God would have to be the author of it. But God is not the author of evil. So evil must be an absence of existence or a lack of real being. How can there be something that is real and yet doesn't have existence? How is this possible? Well, Augustine uses metaphors here. Let me offer you a couple of metaphors that I've made up to maybe help us understand. His metaphors are kind of, 4th century, so they're harder for us to understand. Let me offer you a couple of metaphors I've made up. Okay, so try this one on for size. If I were to take a bowling ball, right, and stand back and chuck it through that chalkboard, through the wall behind it, into the next room, what would we have there? A hole in the chalkboard and in the wall, wouldn't we? Is that hole a real thing? Yeah, it's a real thing, but it's kind of only real because it's an absence of something else. That's why it's a real thing, is because it's an absence of chalkboardness or of wallness. Okay, and although we could say, accurately that it is real, still it's only real because it's the non-existence of something else that ought to be there. Okay, or try this one on. If you're like me, when I was a teenager, I was incredibly lazy. Okay, I wouldn't clean my room, I wouldn't do anything. Okay. And one thing I certainly wouldn't do was throw my food leavings in the trash after meals. Okay, I always wanted my mom to pick up after me. I was an idiot. So imagine there's teenage Jeremy with an apple core left out on the kitchen counter. My mom would play hardball with me, and she wouldn't throw it away. And so either I threw it away or else it just rotted. And eventually she would get angry and punish me in other ways. But so imagine there's that apple core, and over the time, as the days pass, that apple core deteriorates and it rots. And it shrinks, shrivels, right? And you've all seen shriveled, shrunken, rotted apple cores. Okay, they are real things, but they are what they are by virtue of the absence of something else, namely the healthy apple that should be there. Okay, the shriveled, shrunken, rotted apple core is a real thing, but it's real only with respect to something else. Okay, and evil is only real with respect to goodness. It's only real by virtue of being not goodness. Okay, so that's what evil is for Augustine. It's an absence or a lack. Where does evil come from? Well, not from God. It comes from free will. It comes from the exercise of free will. We'll talk about Augustine on the will next week. But for Augustine, humans do have free will. In order to have genuine freedom, not just fake freedom, not just the appearance of freedom, in order to have genuine freedom, people have to be able to choose against God. And that means choosing what God does not desire, namely goodness. They have to be able to choose evil if they are going to be genuinely free. And when beings who are genuinely free choose evil, evil arises. Okay, when they choose the absence of goodness, the lack of goodness, they choose not to obey God. That is an absence of obedience. Obedience is good. Okay, when they choose an absence of goodness, evil comes about. Evil happens. So evil is the product of the exercise of free will for Augustine. That's where it comes from. Okay, those are two crucial, important, huge discussions in Christian theology and philosophy. I'm going to get to the problem of evil, about how evil is compatible with a God who is all good, but let me pause and ask if there are comments so far about either of these two big questions. Victoria.
If evil comes from free will, and evil comes from God, doesn't it still come from God?
Okay, good. Good question. God made free will. People can exercise free will to choose against God. Does this mean God is the author of the evil that people choose? And Augustine's answer there is no. The reason why is, if it is genuine freedom, genuinely free will is the ability to be the author of your own actions. So if we are the little authors of our own actions, then God is not responsible for the bad things that we choose. Okay, so think of it this way, right? I, along with my wife, am the half author of my daughter. Okay, my 5-year-old. she's making choices in life. Some of these choices are good, some of these choices are bad. When she makes bad choices, like when she, like she did the other day, hits the 1-year-old over the head. The 1-year-old deserved it. Oh, yeah. She had, the 1-year-old had snuck into the living room, thinking that no one was watching her, to steal the 5-year-old's toys. Stole the little PJ Masks figures and ran off, tried to make off with them. But the 5-year-old actually saw her. And, like, she's supposed to come tell mommy and daddy, who are, like, the state authority. But instead, she undertook vigilante justice and decided to take matters into her own hands, not wait for the state. Because, justice from the state is always slow, and it's, it's all always impartial, which is hard to deal with. Okay. So she takes matters into her own hands, a little vigilante that she is. Chases the 1-year-old down. The 1-year-old's not that good at being secretive or running away. And, like, bam, bam, hits her, and the toys come back, okay? All right. I saw all this from the kitchen. They both got punishment afterwards. Okay, the 5-year-old beating the 1-year-old. Wrongdoing, okay? Am I the author of the 5-year-olds beating the 1-year-old? I hope not. I really hope I'm not. It has to be a very tenuous conception of authorship to say that I'm the one who brought, in a sense I brought it about by creating the 5-year-old. But if we're going to say that the 5-year-old is genuinely a free being, she's the one who chose to hit the 1-year-old, not me. Right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, she's free. She can act against what mommy and daddy say she's supposed to do. And she did. The 5-year-old chose to act against what mommy and daddy say to come tell mommy and daddy in a situation like that. Don't just beat up on the 1-year-old. She's free, and she chose to beat up on the 1-year-old. There are punishments for that, for beating up on the 1-year-old. She is still genuinely free, even if there are punishments for beating up on the 1-year-old. It's not as though the existence of the punishments diminishes her freedom, her ability to choose. Does that maybe help a little bit? Kind of, sort of? All right, fair enough. Okay, last big point of the day, the problem of evil. Now, we're not going to be able to get into all of this today. I'm going to have to wait till next week. But let me describe some of the general outlines here. Okay, the problem of evil is just this. Recording's still going, we're good. Okay, the problem of evil is just this. If there is a good God, and if evil, then contradiction. Let me expand on this. If God is all good, and also has other characteristics, he's all-powerful, omnipotent, and all-knowing, omniscient. So he is all-powerful. He could stop the evil if he wanted to. He is omniscient. He knows about the evil, and he could stop it. And he's good. Why do we have the evil? Okay, and Augustine's answer is free will is the reason why we have evil. To stop the evil, God would have to undermine free will. Okay, now he could do this. God could choose to have a universe in which there are no free beings. But instead, there are beings who are just automatons or subject to, God's robotic influences or something like that. But he chooses not to. Because in God's calculus of things, it is better to have a universe with genuinely free beings and evil than it is to have a universe with beings who are not free. Okay, and if you think about it, it's really our free consciousness that is central to our own meaningfulness in life. Okay, what makes life meaningful? Well, it's our conscious experiences for sure, but also central to what makes life meaningful is that we have the ability to lead lives as we please, to make choices, to feel feelings, to conceive of things as a free being. Okay, it is the free will of human beings that just massively contributes to our own meaningfulness and the experiences that we have in life. And Augustine's view is that this freedom that we have is a very great good, and it's so great that it justifies God's allowing evil to be around. To do away with evil, God would have to do away with free will. God does not want to do away with free will because that would undermine this, the humanity of humans. It is what makes humans who they are. It would undermine the humanity of humans and would bring about a universe without evil, but also a universe without humans, since it would gut us of that which makes us who and what we are. Okay, so the answer for Augustine, one more pass, is that free will justifies God's allowance of evil, and God considers free will to be such a great good that its presence justifies letting evil still be around. Let me stop. That's our first pass. There are lots of different nuances and sub-arguments with regard to that. I'd like to get into them next week. Let me ask if there are questions or reflections so far on these general ideas. Okay.
So God considers free will good even if it leads to evil?
Yes. Yes. Something can be good even if bad can result from that, the exercise of that something. No, I think we're making a category error and confusing it with something else. Okay, but something can be good in and of itself, as such, even if it is used in bad ways or deployed for harmful purposes. What's an example of that? Let me think. Okay, here's one. I like fresh fruit. Okay, I love oranges. This morning, I downed 2 of those little, what are they called? Like cooties, yeah. No, cuties, yeah. Cuties, it's the same thing. They're really tasty, right? Suppose I downed 75 of them. Bad stuff would happen, wouldn't it? We're talking about emptying out the intestines, like real bad stuff would happen if I downed 75 of them. Does that make cuties in and of themselves bad? No, not really. It's cuties to excess that's the badness. Okay, so the idea here is that free will can be a good, even if free will deployed incorrectly or to excess, wrongly, can be bad. The fact of the free will is itself a good, just like the oranges that I love are themselves a good. Okay, I think that would be the response there. Mm-hmm. Good. Other reflections or questions? Okay, like I said,